Welcome to Thinking Ahead with the Fitness Business Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Stowell. Thinking Ahead's mission is to seek out expert guests who will get us all thinking ahead and challenge us to turn ideas into actions. We discuss concepts, ideas, and strategies that are yet to be trendy because we want you, our listeners, setting the trends and not following them. Joining us on today's show, we welcome Dr. Daniel Krieglstein. Dr. Krieglstein is a behavioral design scientist. He enjoys developing hypotheses for noisy, confusing data sets and allowing consumer behaviors to drive design choices. This is an incredible show with some incredible insights. Make sure to grab a notebook as we get started. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Krieglstein. Before we dive into today's show, could you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and your professional journey to now?
Yeah, sure. I took the long road to where I'm at. I got a PhD in clinical psychology, was working in cancer in oncology. You know, stuff I enjoyed, but most people don't, like end-of-life counseling. But there was a lot of behavioral lifestyle choices that went along with it. Learning how to exercise with chemo, learning how to change your diet when nothing tastes good. And from there, I started partnering with my brother, who was a computer scientist working out of Silicon Valley, one of those U of I guys who went out in the 90s and, you know, did crazy things. And he was starting down working with a psychologist out of Stanford called BJ Fogg in this new field called Behavioral Design. And I started doing some consulting with apps and technology that was trying to achieve what I was doing in the clinical setting. And that really excited me. I was at Northwestern when they switched over their computer system, started talking to the tech side of it, realized I actually knew a lot more than I thought I did about the technology, and, you know, took a leap of faith and left clinical work. Some older relatives thought I was insane to walk out of the hospital, but I haven't regretted looking back. And from health tech, I started branching out into all types of basically anywhere where we're trying to engage consumers to change behavior. I love looking at noisy data sets, challenging corporate assumptions, and finding better ways to let consumers' own behavior drive your choices.
Wow, you're speaking right to the heart of the show and the listeners of the show. So recently, IHRSA has made Reconnect to Wellbeing an industry rallying cry. So aside from just like simple marketing, how can clubs operationalize these emotional goal settings with our members?
My team started with IHRSA this year. IHRSA, I struggle with pronouncing that correctly, as many do. We were challenged with coming up with their Got Milk campaign, a very famous marketing effort, reaching out to consumers at a time when people were turning away from milk. The first thing I discovered in that research, of course, was actually Got Milk was a bit of a failure. They kept spending more and more money on it because people kept turning away from milk. Juices, cheaper sodas, lots of things started showing up on the table. Now we have milk alternatives and substitutes, but the idea of the American consumer drinking a glass of milk in the morning is almost completely gone. So I said, this is actually not a failure, but a perfect example of what my team brings to the equation. If you measure the Got Milk campaign by impact, by acknowledgement, by a lot of traditional marketing metrics, it's successful. My team asks, what's the behavior? What are you trying to change? Did you change it? And by that metric, it's a horrible marketing campaign, even though to this day, some 20 odd years later, 30 odd years later, I say Got Milk and everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. So with IHRSA, we wanted to emphasize what are we trying to change? What are we trying to engage with in the gyms? And it came down to, first of all, in the general population, COVID made us as an industry realize that we're still perceived as a vanity luxury, that we're perceived as something for, weightlifters, people who are maybe a little neurotic about their body, and not for the general population. This is why we didn't get the bailouts like the restaurant industry did, like the hospitality industry did. And yet, as soon as I started pulling up research that I had, from when I was doing actual health psych, and then looking at what had happened since then, since the times I was building health apps, there's just strong, solid data that shows the majority of gym goers are there for their own mental health. It's not just about looking good, it's about emotionally feeling good. And so here we are in the middle of the pandemic, basically taking away someone's psychologist, someone's mental health support, and saying, okay, while the majority of us are now experiencing mild to moderate post-traumatic stress from fear about loved ones passing away, fear about some disease we couldn't control at the time, we're also saying, and you don't get to have your mental health support. It was just a bad decision all around. And we know that now, but we needed messaging that starts to educate the rest of the population, especially lawmakers. So with that, it's also about educating the next consumer, the next 5%, the people who are the low-hanging fruit that don't have gym memberships, aren't regularly active, but do enjoy activity. How do we get them into the gym? And it's about, again, challenging that myth that we're selling pain, that you come here to feel miserable and then maybe 10 years from now, you start to feel good. Because the data shows you show up day one, moderate workout, don't overstress yourself, have a little socialization in a class, damn, you feel good about yourself afterwards. It's not magic, and we need to start marketing that the same way, every other marketing agency focuses on emotion. That's what we sell best. And so how do you operationalize that? It's not enough to start saying in your marketing, hey, feel good, come here. I've seen a lot of rebranding since Ursa started presenting this research in front of gyms, and gyms are leaning into it, but it's more than just marketing. It's more than just saying, hey, come here and get the good feels. It's about targeting a specific demographic with an emotional need, figuring out what journey they're on and where they're searching for that outlet, and then tapping into that the same way an app company did, the same way, Microsoft is going to spend time looking at what you're searching, A/B testing how they put their ad in front of you to move to the next space. But then once you move into their ecosystem, A/B testing from there, what exactly you're trying to achieve in the space, and testing each one of those as an individual behavior. And then having an outcome that explicitly speaks to that. So if you go and you say, let's do a class, it's a spin class designed for people with major depression. We have a very empathetic coach. You can't just go on social media or on a search engine advertisement and say, hey, come to our total fitness expertise on depression, because no one's going to say, oh, please, I'm going to come and announce that I'm depressed in your club. It doesn't work that way. You have to use more subtle language. You have to figure out what works. And with each club, it's going to be a little bit different. And that's what my team and I work on, and are currently working on with several clubs, is A/B testing that messaging, and then also defining those classes as introductory in a way that taps into an emotional need and not just a perception of a physical outcome.
That is a incredible framework. It leads to the next question, though. I mean, can you just take a few moments and tell us, what is behavioral change exactly, and how does it apply to our industry?
Yeah. So this is something specifically, and I'll talk to behavior change. I specifically developed this concept called Behavioral Signal Design. And this comes out of my very unique combination of having spent time in clinical work and now being an industry professor in database management. I've come full circle on the tech side. I teach a class once a week because I just love to keep that pressure on to continually be looking at what that industry is pushing. So what I'm always looking for in the behavior of the individual is how you can turn that into an outcome signal. Instead of running a study or running a program and asking satisfaction surveys, having people click likes, I want to say, if you've created this behavior in a way that's going to form into a habit, great, let's measure that explicitly. Let's turn that into an outcome variable for all our A/B testing of marketing and everything. So with a behavioral outcome, I'm trying to define more specifically, not just that they show up at your gym, maybe they said explicitly, this is the emotion they're seeking. We've designed this class for them. Are they taking this class? Or are they just showing up? When it comes to, if you're trying to figure out if there's a social connectivity, measure those social engagements, measure maybe people becoming friends on Facebook. Find ways on your platform for them to announce that they met someone in your class. That will tell you which classes someone's becoming, which is tapping into that social desire. I work in an industry where I encounter a lot of professionals who are moving from city to city. I'm in Chicago, so we get a lot of transplants. I play soccer once a week, and those leagues lean in heavily to the idea of sports leagues being a way for transplants to make new friends. Everyone's going to join this put together team, get some drinks afterwards, you're going to make new friends. Gyms can lean into that too, and some gyms do try and create social mixture stuff. But there's other ways in which you can design and lean into that with a behavioral outcome and trying to trap that. So behavioral design in general, the go-to example I give is Fitbits, Pedometers, they're called in the scientific concept, tracking your steps. I didn't work with Fitbit, but I was working with one of their competitors in the heydays with my brother. And out the box, this is the kind of thinking people have. If I want someone to achieve a behavior of the experts, I look at what the experts do, quantify it, map it out, and how do I get then these non-engaged people to engage in that same behavior? So Pedometers followed around this logic of thinking, tracking your exercise. This is what the top performers all, they write down their weight each week. They're always pushing themselves forward. They're trying to figure out, okay, I did this many reps this time at this weight. I'm going to put it in my little journal and I'm going to push it a little bit harder each day. So if we can just make that part easier, we'll get people performing. And so we got on everyone's wrists. It was the new gym membership for a while. Get your little steppers. And here's the number. You don't have to do any work, so you can always be pushing yourself forward. Well, the problem was the actual behavioral engagement was normal people sitting in the office with this number on their wrist, literally quantifying that they're getting fat as they sit there. You're getting fatter by the minute. Look, I am now measuring your weight increase. I'm now measuring how lazy you are, how inactive you are. And people were actually, instead of feeling good about themselves, they now had this continual reminder that was a negative emotional trigger. And as a result, early on in sales, they had huge sales. It was the new gym membership. And like gym memberships after New Year's, they only had 50% of new users using them out of the box. So within a week, only half of the users were actually even engaging with it. And then from there, they had a 6-month loss of about 30% of those users. Unsustainable. And so that's where these companies started looking for psychologists like myself and my team and said, hey, why isn't this working? What's going on? And we started explaining you have to gamify it. You have to try and make it a little fun. You have to make sure that it's not creating that negative emotion throughout the day. Finding ways to encourage them to, work out when they can. That's the idea of behavioral design. It's looking at the system itself and saying what is creating a negative emotional input and what's creating a positive emotional input at every single step, and designing for optimizing those positive triggers. Thing that comes to mind from that would be, for instance, in a lot of gyms. I'm not so sure. Doctor just says I need to lose some weight and start exercising. My cardio is bad. Something brought me into the gym. I'm calling around the local gyms to see. I walk in there and the first thing most gyms do, ask you to fill out paperwork. So the start of my journey with your brand is you asking me for work. Right. And I have no immediate emotional reward after that. There's no immediate say like, congratulations is a big first step. In a video game, after that first learning of how to play the controllers, I'm immediately rewarded with some gold or some other weird things that makes me feel good about achieving that. And gyms, we think, let's get the legal paperwork out of the way so that you can start, do a walkthrough. And that's generally behavioral design and how I think about process. All right, how do I turn every single step, and especially those first few key steps? And then how do I create peak experiences? How do I make sure when you go home, the lingering memory is not you with muscle pain, but of some cool social experience you had at the gym? We want to make sure we're actually measuring those memories and testing for them, making sure we're optimizing for them. That's, the long story of behavioral design, I guess.
So again, great segue into, can you just tell us a little bit specifically more about the Reconnect concept, your concept?
Yeah. So how we land on Reconnect, traditional kind of design brainstorming, trying to play around with a couple ideas, seeing what reverberated within the community. We did some testing on social media to make sure that it connected with the audiences and it didn't alienate the base. And that was one of the exciting things, is the base already is speaking online to their emotional benefits of going to the gym. So we weren't alienating the base. And Reconnect, it specifically, we knew we wanted to talk about mental health. We knew we wanted to talk about the emotional benefits of going to the gym, but we couldn't be specific. We knew we couldn't say, come here, we're just as good as a therapist, even though, for instance, there's several studies that show, like major depressive disorder, if you have major depressive disorder and you have a nice structured workout with a coach and you actually go, it's just as good for your mental health and dealing with that mental disorder as taking medication, which is powerful, but you can't advertise that directly. You don't want to lean into that. How do you still speak to the benefits? So we played around with a couple words, and Reconnect all of a sudden hit this chord. We're trying to talk about reconnecting childhood play, things that a lot of us have fond memories of, learning to bike ride or something like that, our first sports game. And Reconnect to youth was where we came up with the concept, but quickly it morphed and we realized, first, we're trying to bring the message this year to reconnect to your gym community. We're trying to speak about, reconnecting to that weekly routine you had of coming to see us, getting out of the house, getting out of the workplace, and have that other space you go to that's not, shopping or eating. It's your space. Reconnect to that. And quickly from my research, I started to realize also, we need to reconnect on a daily basis to our emotional strength. So you have a shit day at work, go to the bar afterwards, or hey, actually reconnect in a healthier place that's not going and drinking your frustrations away, but actually coming and feeling the emotional benefit, connect to a group, have a class where everyone, reconnect to that. Yeah, in psychology we have this long research of the concept of willpower, your inner desire to be able to achieve, the strength you have, the emotional strength you have to persevere. And early on, we really thought that this was kind of like a meter you had, and it was drained throughout the day. And so we, when I was in grad school, we talked about, if you have to have a tough conversation with your significant other or your children or family member, do it early in the day because your willpower is drained by the end. We now know that that's not the case. Willpower is more like a battery that you can recharge at any time throughout the day. So if you have a really stressful time at work, and you come home and you immediately engage in, stressful conversations and dealing with kids coming home and having to help them with homework and, getting food on the table, your willpower will remain drained. But if you take a step, say, go to the gym, some place where you start to feel better about yourself, talking to your friend on the way home from work who makes you feel wonderful, those types of little interventions can actually recharge your willpower to be able to face the next challenge in front of you. And gyms and clubs can serve as that. They can serve as that break at the end of a stressful day to help you recharge that willpower. And there's a lot of research supporting that. And that's the idea of Reconnect, in my mind, at its core, is gyms and clubs can serve as that amazing place on the regular, long into the future. We are not just reconnecting some childhood happiness and movement or reconnecting to friends after COVID, but it's a continual renewal of your inner willpower and strength to be able to deal with daily stresses.
So in this paper, a number of times I came across while reading it, the language of emotion. So can I ask a little bit more about what is the language of emotion? And if you don't mind, could you also perhaps give us an example?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. And I use language of emotion specifically to be ambiguous, because in each situation, the specific language used is paramount to the actual experience of the users. If I'm going outside of fitness and I'm working on a sales app, let's say I'm working, I'm selling diapers, for Target or something. And I want to, I'm working on search words and how people engage. I want to, as a behavioral designer, instead of trying to bucket, white females between the age of 30 and 40, I'm going to use this language. I'm actually more curious about their behavior in the shopping experience. So someone who's shopping between 6:30 and 10 at night versus someone who's shopping for diapers at 9 to noon, there's going to be an overlap of the demographic, but they're actually going to be a more interesting cohort. And they're going to have different emotional desires. That stay-at-home mom, she's got a lot of priorities. That stay-at-home dad is shopping at 10, 11 in the afternoon, mid-morning. I'm going to try and upsell them on some more daily items. The mom who's shopping in the evening, especially late in the evening, the mom or dad who's trying to buy diapers at 9 or 10 at night, that's someone who's probably worked all day and then had to come home and deal with family, and now is finally getting around to dealing with some chores. So I'm not going to try and overwhelm them. I might try and make them just feel supportive, make them feel this is the place to get shit done, and not try and oversell them on other, home remedies or things like that. So this is the idea of emotional language, is understanding the state of someone moving through your process, be it a club membership, be it a marketing advertisement, being it employee training. Right now with employee training, we have to really consider the stress that a lot of these employees have gone through, having lost their jobs, having their jobs put on hold. Oftentimes I brought into companies and they're frustrated that the tech they adopted isn't working. And I asked, what was your internal sales cycle? And they're like, what do you mean? We only have external sales cycles. Like, every time you're engaging everyone, you should be thinking about onboarding. You should be thinking about their emotional cost. You should be thinking about the work you're asking for them, the value they perceive of it. All those questions are exactly the same internally as they are externally. So when I talk about the emotion, the language of emotion, I'm asking, did you create someone who feels like a winner, a hero in this journey? Or did you create someone who feels like a victim? Do they feel overwhelmed by the process you created? Or have you turned into their little Gandalf that's making them, here's my magic place. Well, oh my God, everything's done and this place is perfect. They're solving my problems. I'm coming here again. That's the language of emotion, is understanding where you're bringing someone on that emotional journey.
That's excellent. I in my own day-to-day business, when I'm working with salespeople, one of the things I say to support that is, you've got to understand when you're building out the story, you're not the hero that's saving them. You're the narrator and they're the hero. And you help guide their story, but it sets them up for success. And I think spot on. It's excellent.
And to carry with that a little bit more back onto the idea of behavioral design, is seeing ourselves as a narrator. Too often we lean into then, okay, I need to explain why this challenge isn't really challenging. I need to explain this reward that's coming down the future. I need to make it feel real now. And behavioral design had, years of working on these processes and these apps, our whole field has realized that's something called the information deficit model. We just need to get you to the mental state and the mental understanding that we're at so that you can power through. And this is what happens. Then you go to a hospital and you get you have this disease. Here's a giant pamphlet of stuff to do. In gyms, we try and help them visualize that future state of being healthy and well. And the problem is, it's so much from future discounting research and behavioral economics to choice paralysis and too much information. There's so many, key terms and research I can drop here that shows it's not about educating people. It's not about convincing them the value is worth it or being their coach all the way through, because eventually the coach has to step away. And if they're continually relying on the coach making them feel good and the coach explaining the benefits, it's not going to work. You need to redesign the process so they start feeling those wins and they actually build an internal narrative. You're more like the graphic designer in the story than you are the narrator. You need to make sure that the thing doesn't look as scary as it is. You need to challenge their perceptions by, hiding the giant mountain under a molehill or something like that. Think about how you can redesign the process to alleviate those fears and make them feel those wins early on.
Wow, incredibly well said. That was a powerful statement. I think that's something that every listener should hear and take back and reevaluate their process now. That was excellent. Thank you. So if we could get a little granular for a moment.
Yes.
So on this show, I like to speak to the importance of goal setting, morning routines, just setting oneself up for success each day. So would you mind perhaps sharing with our listeners ways they could better structure their days and achieve greater success through that?
This is a question I don't quite dread, but I struggle with, because I am a bit of a different beast than a professional. My parents are old school hippies. I always explain that they're the type of hippies who were driving a VW bus through Northern Africa when everyone else was burning out at Woodstock. So the academic kind of hippies, if you will, but it led for a bit of a chaotic, kind of do as you will upbringing, both academics. So, a hard emphasis on getting the degree so that you have that freedom. And then I discovered punk rock in high school. And so I dwell in chaos. I like waking up each day and having a few things unplanned. So, and that's why I pursue this field. I like to go into a company where something's just not working. No one has the clear answer. And I come in and kind of look at the chaos, and I love building structure out of that. And so the irony being is that I actually do really enjoy structure. When I do play a video game, I'm immediately trying to figure out the algorithm and how to operate within it. I'm looking at the data. I'm immediately trying to here's the chaos. But unlike many people who do have that structure, a lot of my grad school cohort had, mild anxiety disorder and had very structured days and very structured teaching plans. And that helped them through the day. And this is the lesson I take away is, too often we look to those types of experts and say, this is how a day should be arranged if you want to be like us. And there's moments in my life, key moments, where I look to that student, and I looked at, for instance, I have this very clear moment. I think it was senior year of high school. And I looked at, this kid, he always got straight A's, and I looked at his notes and I was like, holy crap, mine are just chicken scratch all over the page, and he has bullet points. And from that day forward, I worked on bullet pointing and numbering. And when computers became really good at real time taking notes, my notes look amazing now. And I have, I keep those structures. It's important to live in that chaos. You need those structures. So the flip side of the story is to understand that most people who are not high performing, and which is most people, their life is like that, not by choice. Their life is artificially chaotic. Their job has high demands of them. Their children have, emotional disorders. They're taking care of ailing parents, elderly parents. Their life is regular like that. So trying to convince them to live in a structured life, to build like these professionals, oftentimes can't be transplanted easily. It's much easier to try and build small structured wins. And this is some of the work me and my brother did at the American Heart Association, and some theories I've come up with. Instead of building a year path for someone of this is what it looks like and this is what we're going to achieve, try and help them build 1 week of structure and win, and then just celebrate to no end afterwards. Good. All right, we're going to come back to you. Don't worry about it. We're going to come back to you. You did really good. Let them sit with that. Let them feel that win. And then come back, a couple days later, a week later, with a new program. We're starting over. Here you go. You learn this step. We're going to start back. You're going to enjoy this, and have little structured wins. And I bring it back to this. This is actually where I got this idea for health, to have these small structured wins. It's the same way I learned how to study. Take the things that's the easiest, chunk it off, study it, finish it, 3 weeks ahead of time because you could before the final. And then don't push it. Just let yourself be done. Enjoy that you did something 3 weeks ahead of time. Don't feel guilty that you're not jumping to the next part of studying. Feel good you took the easiest chunk and you finished it. Writers talk about just sitting down and just writing babble on the page until the story starts flowing out of them. And so I think too often we look at high performing adults who, most of them have a mild anxiety disorder, and we think that needs to be transplanted on to everyone else to achieve success. But most often, most of us achieve success in small little sprints, small little steps, where we break off a chunk, we feel good about it, we achieve it, and then we reflect back and we say, we're someone who can achieve that. And once we start building that self-narrative, we'll do it more and more and more. And it's not so much about having a clear picture of where you're going. It's having a clear picture of where you're going to win in this specific step. Again, building those rewards sooner than later.
Excellent. Wow. Thank you. Again, I appreciate the perspective because we all, especially as professionals, and we seek to get more done with less, as you know. It was reassuring to hear that it's a journey, not a destination, and we're all figuring it out as we go. So thank you.
And again, and this is something a lot of people say is, when I'm looking at data of a club and I'm looking at the social media and the internal, ticketing system, and I'm just of a client, and it's like the picture's not coming. I just step away. Like I'll go play soccer, go out drink with my friends, and all of a sudden the next day, like I'll be like, man, I couldn't figure that out, and I'm sitting in the shower like, oh crap, there it is. And I'm like, why did that process lead to this insight? It makes no sense. And yet when we get stuck into our routine, sometimes that creativity doesn't spur. And so that's why I like living with a little bit of edge still in my system instead of always trying to have my day structured. But to say it nonetheless, I have meetings and I have structure throughout my life, of course. So you can't achieve success without it.
Of course. So in summation here, if our listeners would like to get in contact with you, how can they best reach you?
So clearviewinsights.com is the website, and you can email, get contact with us there. Google my name, Daniel Krieglstein. There's lots of different links under that, if you can spell it, of course. Those are the key ways to try and get in touch with us, clearviewinsights.com.
We'll definitely have your contact information and links in the show notes as well. So you certainly have given myself and the Fitness Business Podcast listeners something to think about. So I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Krieglstein, for your time today.
My pleasure. I could talk about this stuff for ages.
Thanks. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to the Thinking Ahead show on the Fitness Business Podcast. Until next time, what you leave behind is not what is left engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others. Thank you.